the Big Ten, so I'm going to say Ohio State and Michigan State. I'm going to throw TCU in there. And the winner of Florida, Georgia is going to be in the Final Four. I was the only guy who picked Florida in the SEC Media Poll at SEC Media Day. So
there you go. And it came out that Trayon Harris and Will Greer will be splitting time in that first game. All right, let's see. How about Dave? Give me a team that you feel will have a winning record, but a bad record against the ATS.
Well, I think you have to go with somebody really strong who's going to be laying a ton of points all the time, and who maybe doesn't have a coach who runs it up. So you kind of move Ohio State out of that mix, because Urban Meyer, if he gets a chance to score 90, he will, for the most part. Nick Saban might not. Alabama could very well win all their games, or maybe just lose one. But I wouldn't be surprised if they got a losing record against the spread. They pay a premium every time with Alabama, and their offense might not be real dynamic this year. I like the defense. So I'll say Alabama has a chance to end up on the wrong side of the spread ledger, but certainly not straight up.
All right, Chris?
I think Notre Dame's a team that fits into that category. If you go back over the last couple of years, they've been a double-digit favorite 17 times, and they're 5-12 against the number. They're 16-1 straight up. So typically they win a lot of these games, but they're a lot closer than a lot of people think. And the other one, I think, if you're going to say another team, would be USC. I mean, they're talented as all get out, but some mind-numbing loss, 17-point favorite at BC, you lose. 15-point favorite is Washington State, lose a couple of years ago. There's a lot of games that they find themselves losing that they necessarily shouldn't. So I think USC, Notre Dame, again, to Dave's point, two teams that are probably going to be pretty good. You're laying a lot of points that won't necessarily cover as big favorites.
Joe?
I think it's Auburn. A lot of people are calling this team a top 5 team. This was a team that was 1-4 against top 25 competition. Lost 75% of its offensive rushing touchdowns with quarterback Nick Marshall and Cameron Artis-Payne. They lose big play wide receiver Sammy Coates, who led the team with 741 receiving yards. But more importantly, teams can't double team both Coates and Duke Williams on the defensive side of the ball. In 5 of their losses, they gave up 95 yards more than their season average of 163 yards rushing. They gave up 268 yards rushing in those 5 losses. They gave up 289 to Georgia, 227 to Alabama, 223 to Miss State, 176 to A&M, and 400 to Wisconsin. How is that a top 5 team in my eyes? I don't see it.
Yeah, we'll get there. They'll get a test early on from Louisville's defense. We'll see how good Jeremy Johnson is. He's a good, solid passer. Percentage-wise, he only threw 38 passes, but he completed 27 of them or whatever it was last year. So small sample size. He looks like he's accurate. From what I understand from Rod Bramblett, the voice of Auburn, he's a better runner than people think. A lot of folks thought Marshall, head and shoulders, is a much better runner than Jeremy Johnson, but here is the jury's still out on that, according to the Auburn broadcaster, Bruce Marshall.
I agree with Chris. I mean, he took my 2 teams right from me there, Notre Dame and SC. I think, and Chris said it, Brian Kelly is not going to be a great point spread coach. They're going to be laying a lot of points again this year. And I think SC is going to fit into that category as well. I ought to bring another one to the table here. I'm going to say LSU. Les has still got to figure out his quarterback situation. I don't like the new defensive coordinator he brought in. I think he might miss Chavis. And LSU is traditionally overvalued, and they oftentimes have trouble covering.
All right, let's go. Good deal. Let's go to the other end of the spectrum. Talk to me about a team that may not have a good record, 1 wins and losses, but may be very solid against the spread, Dave.
Yeah, this is going to sound funny, but I wouldn't be surprised if, as the season goes on, UNLV might actually become a decent spread team. They could get crushed early, but I think Sanchez is changing the mentality a little bit, and you're always going to be getting a ton of points. This team could end up showing a lot of fight and might be able to scratch out some spread wins as big underdogs later on in the season. Now, don't chisel that in stone, because they don't have much depth, and if they had the injury situation that they had last year, which was unbelievable at times, that goes out the window. But even last year, they showed a lot of fight. They just couldn't win games. I think that fight will still be intact, and they might get better as the season goes along if they can stay a little healthier than they did in 2014.
Chris, what about you?
I think Colorado fits into that category. I think Mike Rapidanis did a really good job there. They're a team with a returning starting quarterback. We have experience. Nelson Spruce is a great wide receiver. So even when they're behind, they have potential to score points and kind of stay in the game within a lot of big numbers. They're probably going to be 2 touchdown underdogs in most of their Pac-12 games. And they nearly pulled a couple upsets last year. Nearly beat UCLA. They were in a lot of other games. And maybe this is the year where Colorado, even though they may be 5-7, 4 and 8, somewhere around that area. I think they're going to be a positive ATS team.
There you go. They open, of course, on that Thursday night in Hawaii with Whittick making his start there for Norm Chow and the Rainbow Warriors, former USC quarterback. Joe?
I think it's Virginia. This team was 5-7 last year. I think Mike London's on the hot seat, but this is a team that performs very well, very strong offense and defensive lines, +5 in turnover margin. Offensive line played very well. Only gave up 15 sacks on the year. They have Matt Johns there, Grayson Lambert, who was the backup quarterback that split time with Johns, moved on to Georgia. So I really think that he'll progress in the system. He's got a big play running back in Tyquan Mizell. I'm considering Virginia to be a bowl-eligible team this year. I think they have a very successful season, so I think they'll be underdogs in a lot of games.
Well, they are in their opener against UCLA, but they sacked the hell out of Hundley last year in the opener. That game in Charlottesville, this game in Pasadena. A lot of points to give Virginia. Rosen, his first start. Do you think that they'll throw the house at Rosen in his first start?
I think they will. They have to. I think the cross-country trip could hurt this team. That's my only concern with that. But Josh Rosen is a freshman. Expect mistakes. They lose a lot on the defensive side of the ball. But Mike London's a disciplined head coach. I think he'll have his team ready. I think they'll be in this game too.
All right, Bruce.
Sunbelt, Florida Atlantic, awfully good underdog team in recent years. They've continued that trend with Charlie Partridge. They may not get to be above 500, but they lost 4 games by 3 points or less last year. They think the offensive line is better. Johnson, the quarterback, is back. Good value there. One more in the Mountain West, New Mexico, though. I actually think the Locals might get to 6-6 and bowl eligible this year. Bob Davie has made slow but steady progress there. The option is still a headache for opponents. I think the defense will be a little bit better. Schedule breaks well. New Mexico could be a point spread winner this year.
Okay, a lot of handicappers I know are situational players, maybe more so in seasons that are 162 games like baseball. When you have just the 13 or 12 games in college football, maybe not as much. Dave Koken, situational players, do you look at the schedule prior to and look for flat spots or revenge spots when you're looking at your future games?
Not as much as I used to. And again, this falls under the guise of this information is now out there for everybody as opposed to it not perhaps being that way in the past. So the odds makers adjust to these things now, and a lot of times the value that might have existed in prime revenge spots or obvious sandwich spots, it's like everybody knows about these now, and they put it in the line. And once it's in the line, if the value's not there anymore, you really can't expect it to make money for you. So I still circle a bunch of games, but then I end up not playing a lot of them. So, you know, it really falls under the guise of, is it still playable once the week that it's scheduled actually comes around? And frequently the answer to that's no. But there are certain games in the very first week of the season that I did circle, and whether it works or not, we'll have to wait and see. One of them was a Temple-Penn State game. I don't know if Temple can stay with them for 4 quarters. I'll have to wait and see, but this is a huge game for this team. Huge. And Temple has a chance to play with Penn State in this game. I took 7 with the Owls, and I feel decent about that. And that, to me, it fell into a situation where I've got almost the entire team back from last year. They've got like almost virtually the whole team back from last year. They were competitive with Penn State last year. I think Williams, the quarterback, made a bad mistake, and the game kind of got away from him. He had a lot of bad mistakes last year. He was kind of disappointed as a sophomore. But I think with all that experience, this will be a game Temple's really pointing to. And so I took the Owls plus the 7 for a first week spot. And that's the kind of situational spot I do like. But again, they're just not as frequent as they used to be. And I've become more, I guess you could say, more metrics oriented over the past few years in college football, and it seems to be working pretty well.
Chris, what about you? And you are a Penn State fan, and I looked at that Temple game. I think half of Happy Valley will be at that game.
Penn State's offensive line hasn't gotten any better from last year. That Temple defense was very good last year, and that's kind of from that role of Penn State. That's kind of Temple around. That's a game for him, kind of like Al Golden. That's some game circle to Temple. If Temple can win that game, that's kind of a job stepping stone type of game. So I like Temple in that game as well, just like what Dave does. And in terms of me, my job is to find different trends and things and research different statistics and anomalies every week when I'm on the show, and not necessarily from a handicapping standpoint. I'll look for a note, and then I'll look at the point spread and be like, I wonder, Alabama as a favorite of 7 points or less in a conference game, what are they? And I actually uncovered a good note about Alabama's lack of success as a favorite in a conference game is a touchdown or less. I mean, there are other things that come up with, like Bill Snyder is an underdog. Like the last, I forget what the note is, but the last X times he was a double-digit underdog, he won, I think, 7 of the games outright, and like 9-1 against the number. So you stumble upon these things when I'm looking at notes for the week, and then I kind of take the next, from a general, like statistical oriented, I'll look at it, and then I'll take the next step and narrow it down into like a point spread or a Vegas analytical type thing that I can either put on chalk or just kind of give to the guys for the show.
Joe?
I will say this, when it comes to college football, you circle games, Ken, but keep in mind, rivalry games, back-to-back road trips. I can tell you 3 years ago when Geno Smith was at West Virginia Conference realignment, they were 6-0, they went on the road in Austin, had a very tough game with Texas. They went back home. The following week, they had to come back to Texas to face Texas Tech in Lubbock. So it's back-to-back road games. When you bet college football, unfortunately, you're not dealing with professionals. These are 18, 19-year-old kids. Keep in mind, it's a spot like that I would look at. But now, since we brought up the Penn State-Temple game, I will say this statistically. Penn State hasn't lost to Temple since 1941. The last 4 games that Penn State's won over Temple have been by an average margin of victory of 10.2 points per game. You mentioned the offensive line by Penn State. They had 43 sacks allowed last year, which was one of the worst statistical offensive lines in Division 1A. And you talk about the offensive line in terms of the running game. Penn State only averaged 102 rushing yards per game last year. The previous 6 years, they've never rushed for less than 143 rushing yards per game. Put a lot of pressure on Christian Hackenberg. He had 12 touchdowns last year. 4 of them came in the bowl victory over BC. So that's a line that stood out to me as well. Temple, why are they only getting 7 points? I mean, the odds makers know they do have 19 returning starters, 10 on offense, 9 on defense. Tyler Matakevich, Chris, you know he's a beast. They have a dynamic quarterback in P.J. Walker. He's a dual threat. So keep an eye out for that. But I look at games, like I said, back-to-back road trips. This is not the NFL. You're dealing with young, immature kids, and travel and rivalry games. A team can be 0-12, but will be up for a rivalry game. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, that's a good point. In fact, I looked at Arkansas's over-under win total even before Williams went down. To me, Bielema has changed the way of the SEC. He's the only guy that plays typical old-fashioned Alabama football right now. That offensive line is the biggest in all of football, NFL included, 6 or 7 back. Collins is there, they still have Walker, they still have a stable of running backs, and I think they are able to run the ball down the team's throat. So I looked at their over win total, but when I looked at their back-to-back road trips, they have 2 of them, at Tennessee, at Alabama, then later on a couple revenge spots, they're at Ole Miss, at LSU, 2 teams they shut out last year. So that's what kept me off Arkansas as far as going over the win total. Bruce, what about you?
Most important thing is have a way to narrow down the games every week. If you're looking at the card, and Hogan made a pretty good point. I mean, it's hard. You end up, there's 30, 35 games that you like, unless you want to bet all of them. You have to find some way to narrow them down. And we used to do a publication called the Technical Report, where we would have these graphs and trends, and we would chart everything, and we'd, every week there's 25 to 30 games. Now, what do you do after that? How do you identify it, and how do you narrow it down a little bit? So figure out what works there for me. Team by team, I just look at point spread streaks, try to figure out who's winning, covering against the number, who isn't. From that bunch, identify some teams you think might go on a longer streak or might not. One situation I will look at, and when I go to these media days and I ask the players, you get nothing out of the coaches, but if you can get a player to be honest on a team that had fired its coach the previous year, and when the situation started to unravel, how disruptive that could be internally. If these guys are being honest, and several of them have been to me in the last couple of years, and say, yeah, it was distracting. And UNLV, the guys here, last month the Cosmopolitan told me that. So watch these teams where it looks like the handwriting is on the wall. Maybe Iowa State this year, maybe Indiana, maybe Virginia, with Nolan London's on the hot seat. By mid-season, you know a lot of these things are going to go pear-shaped. And sometimes those teams just go south, and you look to go against them.
All right, I just want to jump in with quick, because that's a great point you just made, Bruce. But sometimes there's also overreaction to it, and I think we saw that today with this crazy situation in Illinois, where they fired a bad coach, Tim Beckham, who, for the life of me, I could not understand how he was back this year to begin with. There were already off-the-field problems with that team after last season. They haven't won anything. And they brought in Bill Cubitt, who's, I think was the offensive coordinator, who was actually a pretty good head coach at Western Michigan. And the line immediately dropped in this game. I think it was 17 and dropped to like 14 and a half, something like that. That's an overreaction. And I'm not saying run out there and bet Illinois because there's value in it now, but don't knee-jerk to the Kent State side just because Illinois fired a coach that most of the players couldn't stand anyway.
I agree with that, Dave. I mean, Cubic might actually be an upgrade from Beckman if you ask me.
Yeah.
But what you want to do, this is mostly in the second half of the season, and these are bad teams that are already bad, and they can all, every year there's a few of those that unravel completely, and these are the teams usually that the coaches on the way out.
And I agree with you. I
happened
think
with USC a couple of years ago when Wayne Pittman
Yes.
came in. When Wayne was gone, they played with Coach Joe the rest of the year.
Chris, do me a favor, just grab that mic, bring it a lot closer to you. And when you guys are looking at me, you're not projected to the audience, so a lot of times you guys...
We're trying not to look at you, Ken.
Okay, they hear you now. Okay, they hear you, no doubt. Over-under win total. Dave Koki, give me one over-under win total college football that you love.
I'll give you one over and one under. One of them is on my own analysis. The other one I'm going to credit Jeff Seeley, who runs a company called Metric Sports in the Midwest. And he's very, very good in the Mid-American Conference. Really knows his stuff there, knows the coaches as well. And he is very bearish, which means he doesn't like Ball State this year. And the funny thing is he knows Pete Lembo and thinks he's a great coach, so do I. Lembo could be in line for a bigger job. But the team is bad this year. And an under wager on Ball State might get you paid. I like Appalachian State out of the Sun Belt. I think they could be a 10-win team. This is a program that's on the rise at a smaller level, obviously. We're not suggesting that Appalachian State's suddenly going to start playing Big 12 or SEC teams for a standoff, but this is a program that's on the way up. They used to be a perennial powerhouse in Division 1 AA or FCS, whatever you want to call it. And they've had a few rough stretches coming up to the FBS level, but I think the program's the best it's been by quite a bit. Since they arrived in the FBS. I think they're going to win the Sun Belt this year, and I like Appalachian State over. I think the 7.5 is the total. They should get over that.
Chris?
I'll give you two overs. I mentioned before the two teams that I thought they got a great shot to make the playoff. Louisville is 7.5. They don't play a team that finished 2014 with a winning record in the final 5-6 games of the season. So if they can get through the first 6 games of the regular season this year, 3-3, I mean, there's no way they finish worse than 8-4. I mean, I think 7.5 over for Louisville is one of the best bets out there. And Texas A&M, their total's 8. As bad as things went for the Aggies last year with Kenny Hill and everything that went on off the field, they were 7-5 in the regular season. I think with Chief coming in now on defense, they'll be better off for that. I think 8-4 is the worst case scenario for A&M, and I think they're more of a 10 or 11 win team at the very least.
Joe?
I like Iowa. Iowa's my team. If you look at their schedule, no Ohio State, no Michigan State, no Michigan. First 8 games on their schedule are winnable. They can be 8-0. I'm actually picking them to win the division in the Big Ten, face Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game. I like C.J. Beathard at the quarterback position, so I like Iowa to surprise a lot of people. Another team is Texas. 6-7 last year. Charlie Strong is one of the best game planners in college football. Make no mistake about it. You could look at that TCU game. They got blown out, but defensively, that team had the right game plan against Trev Boykin. They held Baylor in that high-octane offense to only 28 points. I expect Texas to really rebound. He's a disciplinarian. He'll get it done in Texas. And I'll give you an under. BYU has one of in my opinion, the hardest schedule in college football. They face UCLA, they face Nebraska, they face Michigan, they face Missouri, East Carolina, Cincinnati, Fresno State, and Utah State. All bowl teams. Jamal Williams left the team. Falls all on quarterback Taysom Hill, who's coming out off an ACL injury. I know he's healthy, but in my opinion, I have to see it to believe it. And in my opinion, I think they lack the speed to keep up with those teams under for BYU.
Yeah, they're very physical, though, and they do get Boise State at home. No Jamal Williams is a big loss. Bruce?
Florida, if I pick the Gators as a team to perhaps storm the Final Four, I might as well pick them to go over 7. I think this is a 10-win team this year. You got a coach who really understands offense for the first time in 4 years there. I like McElwain a lot. I think you're going to see a big upgrade from the Gators. Only 4 true road games for Florida this year, too. So Gators, there are 2 others in the ACC. I think NC State, easy non-conference schedule, peripheral Heisman Trophy threat, and Jacoby Brissett, quarterback of Florida transfer, put up huge numbers last year. Dave Dorn, we saw the system start to kick in a year ago, finished the season fast, won the bowl game against UCF in hostile territory in St. Pete. And how about Navy? They're sitting at 7.5, I believe, like NC State. First time in a conference in the American this year. I think they're going to be a load for all those American teams to handle. Keenan Reynolds is another guy who could end up being a long shot Heisman candidate. By the end of the season, could be the all-time NC2A touchdown leader.
All right, we'll wrap things up. I'm just going to get a sleeper from everybody, and then I want to play in Week 1 college football. Dave, a sleeper that you like and a play that you like in Week 1.
I think North Carolina is a bit of a sleeper. They have a good offense, we all know that. Marquise Williams, kid's a dynamic quarterback in that system. They couldn't stop anybody last year. I'm telling you, if the 4 of us or the 5 of us found 6 of the guys from up there, we could have scored on North Carolina last year. But they brought in Gene Chizik as a defensive coordinator, and you can have your debate as to how good a head coach Chizik was. And this guy knows his stuff, and he's going to be a great assistant there. I think North Carolina immediately upgrades on the defensive side of the ball, and this could be a pretty good football team down in the ACC this year. Fedora knows what he's doing with that system. Obviously, a lot of off-the-field issues for them, but they're an improved squad. I don't think South Carolina is particularly good, especially by SEC standards. I took the 3 in the first week of the season. I think North Carolina's going to win the game outright. So there's I don't know if it's a sleeper or not, but it's a side.
No, it's definitely a sleeper. They're picked to come, 3rd or 4th in the coastal side of the ACC by most. Most have Georgia Tech, Virginia Tech battling it out on that side. Chris, what about yourself?
Yeah, I like Louisville Week 1 to beat Auburn. I think Louisville's defense is great. There's a lot of familiarity with Todd Grantham and some of the kids he's brought in, transferring from the SEC to play at Louisville now. I think there's going to be a little bit of a different type of Auburn offense this year, and I think Louisville, their defense is going to be great. Petrino's offense is always going to score points, and I like the Cardinals to pull the upset there. And not a surprise, but I do like Alabama to handle Wisconsin Week 1. The Badgers got a lot of problems on the offensive line right now, and Alabama's defense is going to be very, very staunch for them, and I can't envision Wisconsin scoring very many points. And it was like 10 or 11 at the time. I would lay the points with Alabama.
Yeah, I'm seeing up to 12 places. Clement, we know, is a good back, but only 2 of 5 back on the offensive line. And talking to Badger Blitz, they said this is the thinnest that they've ever remembered Wisconsin's offensive line being. Then you look at Arkansas, probably the thickest that they've been since the old Southwest Conference. Why? Because Bielema was down there building that offensive line the way he did in Madison for so many years. What about you, Joe?
I guess I'm going to spoil the party because I really like Wisconsin in this game. You look at Alabama hasn't lost an opening season game since 2001 by an average margin of victory, 24.2 points per game. Last loss came in the Rose Bowl against UCLA with Corey Powell and Skip Hicks. But this is not the same Alabama team that it was even 40 years ago. You look at this team, it was -2 in turnover margin for the first time since prior to 2008. This team gave up 104 rushing yards per game, which seems like a dominant statistic against the better teams in the SEC. Mississippi State, they gave up 136. Against Tennessee, they gave up 181. Against LSU, it was 183. Against Auburn, it was 174. And everybody knows against Ohio State, it was 281. They only have 3 starters coming back on offense. They don't have Amari Cooper. They don't have DeAndrew White. No Christian Jones. They have only 3 starters coming back. And if you think you could just plug in wide receivers, offensive line, no TJ Yeldon, and expect to get the same type of output because it's Alabama, think again. Wisconsin can run the football. They put up 400 rushing yards on Auburn. That bowl victory will give this team confidence, and I think Wisconsin gets the upset on Saturday.
I think Chris is the right guy for Stave because he's an offensive-minded coach. I think last year with McAvoy and with Stave never was comfortable because he just wasn't on the field enough, and he also had a shoulder injury. I think they open it up and they go deep if he can get some protection. I think it could be a close game. You also said, and this came out way before some guy from ESPN that came out and said he thought Alabama would lose 5 games this year. Joe Lisi on my radio show on Yahoo Sports Radio 3 weeks prior said he thought Alabama would lose 5 games this year. Joe, just elaborate because I know it blows a lot of minds out there.
I did. They can go to the tape.